If you've ever been inside a temple for Krishna consciousness or, maybe the home of a devotee,
Mm.
you've probably seen a really unique and beautiful sight.
Mm-hmm.
It's a plant, a type of basil, actually. It's fragrant, has these small leaves, and it's often on its own special altar.
Mm.
Sometimes it's dressed up under a little canopy.
And she's treated with just the utmost reverence. This is not gardening. Not at all.
No.
She's worshipped every day with ghee lamps, with incense, fresh water, and there are specific prayers chanted just for her. This is Tulsi Devi, the sacred basil, worshipped as a living goddess of devotion.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources are pointing to a concept here that is, well, it's both ancient and really radically insightful.
Yeah.
The idea of worshiping a plant is the embodiment of pure devotion. So today, our deep dive is all about understanding why Tulsi Puja isn't just some optional ritual,
Yeah.
but is actually central, essential
Yeah.
to the practice of Krishna consciousness.
It really is.
We want to get into what the daily practice really involves and what deeper spiritual lessons it teaches you about the link between devotion, nature, and the divine.
It's absolutely essential knowledge for anyone engaging with this philosophy. The scriptures frame Tulsi Devi not just as, a medicinal herb, though she is that,
Right.
but as a key spiritual link, a bridge, really, between the material world we're in now and the transcendental spiritual reality. She's the conduit through which a devotee's offerings are even accepted by the Lord.
That right there, that immediately gives her such a high spiritual status. And to understand why she has that status, we have to go back to her origin story.
Yes.
She didn't just sprout one day in a pot. She was a personality first.
That's right. Before she ever manifested here in this world as the Tulsi plant, she was known in the spiritual realm as Vrinda Devi.
And Vrinda Devi is important.
Very important. She's considered the head of the gopis, who are the most intimate and eternal associates of Srimati Radharani.
And just for our learner audience, let's briefly contextualize that. Who is Srimati Radharani?
Srimati Radharani is considered the original internal spiritual energy of Lord Krsna himself. She's the embodiment of perfect, pure love and devotion.
Okay.
So to be an eternal associate like Vrinda Devi means you are in the absolute inner circle of the divine feminine in the spiritual world.
So, not a minor figure at all. The sources explain that she came down to the material world and through a whole series of divine pastimes, incredible devotion, and self-sacrifice. She took the form we now recognize.
The humble Tulsi plant.
Exactly.
And this change, this transition to the plant form, it solidified her role forever. What's so fascinating here is what happened next, this divine decree that made her indispensable.
What was that?
Lord Vishnu declared that he would only accept worship, and that means anything, water, food offerings, even silent prayers,
Wow.
if it included a tulsi leaf. This essentially enshrined her as the necessary intermediary. She became the spiritual bridge that lets a devotee's pure intentions reach the supreme.
So without her, the offering it isn't complete.
Incomplete, yes.
She is literally the gateway of acceptance. And that explains why the daily ritual, the puja, is so important. It's not just a habit.
No, it's a source of profound, really applicable spiritual lessons that you get just from her nature, her existence as a plant.
Right.
Exactly. When you spend time analyzing the practice, you see that Tulsi Devi is the perfect spiritual teacher. She teaches just through her form. We can really distill her existence down into 3 core spiritual principles.
Okay, lay them out for us. And give us an example of how the plant form perfectly embodies each concept.
The first principle is humility. Just think about her position. She's a great goddess, worshipable even by the greatest demigods, and yet she appears in the simplest, most non-demanding form of a plant. In our world, we tend to equip importance with, size or power or complexity. Tulsi teaches that true spiritual importance is in selfless availability and humility. She's never looking for glory. She's just there to be of service.
That's a powerful contrast.
Yeah.
We often expect divinity to show up with, thunder and lightning, but here, the most crucial devotional element is utterly unassuming. What's the second lesson?
The second is purity. Her leaves are considered so spiritually pure. They have the power to purify anything they touch, or to cleanse the spiritual contamination of the person honoring her.
And the sources make a pretty staggering claim about that, don't they?
They do. A staggering claim that by simply honoring her, she can purify even the worst sins.
That's a lot of potency in such a small form. So how is that purification understood? Is it just like physical contact with the leaf, or does it need a conscious act of repentance from the devotee?
That's a crucial distinction. The leaf itself has spiritual power. Sure, if a Tulsi leaf touches food, that food becomes purified. But the full benefit, that comes through intentional devotion.
Ah, okay.
By serving her, by using her as that gateway to Krishna, you are engaging in an act of pure devotion. And it's the pureness of her service, which you're now associating with, that purifies you. It's a spiritual transference through respect and ritual.
And the third teaching.
The third is service. Every single part of the plant, the tiny leaves, the delicate flowers, even the dead, hardened stems, is used directly and exclusively in the Lord's service. She is completely 100% dedicated.
How so?
Well, the leaves are offered, the flowers are used for garlands, and the stems are carved into the beads that devotees wear. She illustrates the ideal of unalloyed service, which is really the whole goal of Krishna consciousness.
And that brings us right back to that dependency we talked about at the start.
Yes.
If Krishna, the Supreme, won't accept offerings without her, she beautifully illustrates this principle that pure devotees are absolutely necessary if you want to approach God with real devotion. She's the perfect living manifestation of that principle in nature.
It creates this fascinating theological model where the highest expression of devotion is woven into the natural world, which it radically shifts how you approach the whole ecosystem.
It makes the environment conscious,
And
personal. Now let's move from the why, the deep spiritual lessons, to the how. What does this daily devotion actually look like? Because the sources are very clear on this. This is attending to a deity, not just keeping a houseplant alive.
The routine is meticulous, and it's all driven by that same principle of service that Tulsi herself embodies. Every morning, devotees wake Tulsi Devi with specific prayers. Then they perform pradaka,
Which is walking around her.
circling her pot, yes, usually an odd number of times. They offer her fresh water, a ghee lamp, all with the consciousness that they are serving a living, divine person who is deeply loved by the Lord.
And that care continues all day, right? Especially when her leaves are needed for an offering. The collection process itself sounds like a kind of spiritual art form.
It really is. It's done with tremendous care. Devotees will carefully handpick the leaves, making sure they never tear or damage the plant roughly. There are specific rules about when you can pick leaves, how many.
And why is that?
Because each leaf is seen as a direct servant of Krishna, and the devotee's job is to treat that servant with deep respect and gentleness.
And this reverence continues into the evening.
Yes. The day ends with another lamp offering, more prayers, and often the singing of the traditional Tulsi Arati songs. The famous lyrics from that song just reinforce her high status, proclaiming she's worshipable even by the most powerful beings in the universe. She is absolutely central.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond the daily routine, the sources highlight one annual ceremony that takes this worship to a whole other level of complexity and deep spiritual symbolism.
The Tulsi Shalagram Viva.
The divine wedding ceremony.
This ceremony usually takes place on Devatani Ekadashi, which is often in November, and the timing is significant. Ekadashi marks the traditional end of Lord Vishnu's 4-month resting period, which means the season for auspicious events like weddings can officially begin.
That immediately gives the celebration context. So tell us more about the preparation, the atmosphere.
It's a huge, elaborate celebration. It really mirrors a traditional Vedic wedding. For days beforehand, Tulsi Devi is decorated meticulously as a bride.
What does that involve?
Applying symbolic things like turmeric and henna to her pot and canopy, adorning her with silks, preparing flower garlands. The ceremony is performed to unite her with the Shalagram Shila.
Which is?
It's a sacred ammonite-like stone from the Gandaki River, and it's worshipped as a non-manifest form of Lord Vishnu himself.
So you have the ultimate devotee, Tulsi, being married to the Supreme Lord, who is represented by this stone. What profound concept does this beautiful, complex ceremony symbolize for everyone taking part?
It's the ultimate embodiment of spiritual aspiration. It represents the union of the purest devotee with the Supreme Lord. It signifies the auspicious start of the devotional season, but I think most importantly, it acts as the annual sanctification of the ideal of service through pure, unconditional love. By participating, you're reinforcing the spiritual ideal that married life, or really any life, is best lived when it's dedicated entirely to the service of the divine. The tradition actually encourages married devotees to observe this ceremony every year as a renewal of that commitment.
It transforms a spiritual abstract into a vivid, relatable family event. But Tulsi's significance, it stretches far beyond the altar and the temple. In this next part, we can bridge this practice to broader concepts of well-being and what the sources call sacred ecology.
And this is where the physical and spiritual roles just merge completely. We mentioned her physical properties. She's renowned in Ayurveda, the ancient Indian medical system, as the incomparable one.
Is celebrated for her healing abilities.
Remarkable abilities to balance the body and mind. She is often used as an adaptogen.
Yes, her medical use is extensive, but in the devotional context, it seems like the spiritual protection she offers is even more central to the practice.
Absolutely. The spiritual benefits are deeply woven into daily life. Her leaves spiritually purify anything they touch, which makes her essential for sanctifying food or water.
Right.
And devotees find that chanting sacred mantras or japa near her is considered especially potent. Her presence creates this concentrated field of purity.
And the connection is also carried personally, isn't it? With the wearing of her beads.
Precisely. For devotees, wearing Tulsi mala beads carved from her dried stems is a powerful physical and spiritual practice. These beads purify the wearer, offer spiritual protection, and they act as a constant, gentle reminder of one's commitment to service.
There's a powerful quote about that, isn't there?
Yes, this palpable connection is why Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the ISKCON movement, stated quite clearly that where Tulsi is worshipped, Lord Krsna resides with all his opulences. Her presence literally invites the divine presence into the environment.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this practice is fundamentally a blueprint for sacred ecology. In a world that's obsessed with exploiting resources, with commodifying nature, Tulsi Puja teaches the exact opposite.
It fundamentally shifts the relationship. It's not one of use and consumption, it's one of service and worship. We're not just moving from using a tree to planting one, we're moving from seeing it as a resource to seeing it as a conscious entity, a pure devotee.
That is a radical framework for environmental thought. Worshipping Tulsi acknowledges this foundational belief in the tradition, that plants, rivers, mountains, all of nature are conscious, personal energies of God.
They're not inert resources?
No, they have to be respected and served.
And so the simple act of watering her or singing to her becomes an acknowledgement that you are tending to the divine energy. It elevates gardening into a full spiritual practice.
So for you, the learner, taking all this in, how can this rich, detailed practice become a practical, personal connection? It's a big shift in consciousness to approach a plant as a living goddess.
The first step is that conscious shift. Remember that devotees call her she, a person, and a great devotee. You have to approach her with that inherent respect, that recognition of her identity, instead of treating her like a decoration.
And the sources show that the practice doesn't demand some massive, instant lifestyle change.
Not at all. You can start small. If keeping a living plant is hard because of your climate or your space, you can keep dried Tulsi leaves and offer those with respect to a picture or deity of Krishna.
That's very accessible.
Or you can simply make a point of chanting your japa, your meditative mantras nearby a plant, just drawing on that sanctified atmosphere she provides.
Or, if you are caring for a living plant, you can just offer a mental prayer when you water her, or when you carefully take a leaf for an offering. Even just learning her simple daily prayers is a powerful way to connect yourself in a very immediate way to this timeless tradition.
It's all about building a relationship, honoring her service, and recognizing that the purest form of devotion is found in humility and selfless giving.
So what does this all mean? Our deep dive into Tulsi Puja shows that this is far more than just a simple, isolated religious ceremony about a common herb.
It isn't.
It's a beautiful living practice that fundamentally shatters the artificial divide we so often create between ritual and real life, and between what we call divine and what we call natural.
It confirms the foundational idea in this tradition that everything, when you view it through the lens of loving service to the Supreme, is spiritual, everything is personal, and everything is interconnected. Tulsi Devi, the humble basil plant, stands as this quiet but powerful testament to the potency of pure devotion and the sanctity of selfless service.
We've centered this discussion on Tulsi as a bridge between the material and spiritual worlds, a living goddess in plant form who ensures our offerings are accepted. So let me leave you with a thought to mull over. If a plant can be acknowledged as a pure devotee and the highest expression of service, what other seemingly inanimate or often ignored aspects of the natural world, the quality of the water you drink, the soil under your feet, might also hold an unacknowledged spiritual consciousness or identity? What everyday item in your life, when viewed through a lens of service and respect rather than one of utilization, could transform your own relationship with the divine?